Welcome to the Intimacy Lab. I'm Michelle Renee, an intimacy guide, surrogate partner, and professional cuddler. We're here to talk about intimacy in a much broader view than what you probably think. Most people think about intimacy as sex. We're going to break that apart here. Welcome to the lab. Welcome to the Intimacy Lab. I'm so excited today to be joined by my friend Leela Sinha, who I met. You guys are going to get tired of me saying this. I met at Sex Geek Summer Camp. I feel like so much of my life is still connected to that 1 year that I went to camp. It's like 2015, like all these connections were made and I didn't know what I was going to be doing yet in the world. And in that, like so many people kind of have stuck around in my life is kind of cool. And Leela is one of those people. So, Leela, you would probably do a better job introducing yourself than I will, but if you want me to take a shot at it, I will.
I would love to have you take a shot at it. I always like to hear how other people perceive me because
Okay.
I know what I think, but I'm inside my head.
Yeah. Well, Leela Sinha is I know you're a UU pastor. I don't know if that's the word they use in UU. Is it pastor?
Usually we use minister, but pastor is correct.
I grew up in like the Methodist church and pastor was very common for me. So I met Leela at Sex Geek Summer Camp and I was like, UU pastor and sex educator. And how do these things go together? But now that I've learned a lot more about the UU church, it makes more sense because you guys have a fabulous sex education program. So it all kind of came together in my head that way. But you also, if I remember the story correctly, you were laid up on your back and you got to thinking about life and you came to this commonality of all these things in your life come back to you're too much. Right. And I was like, in this time when I met you and when you are an author and your book came out, I was really in the feelings of feeling like too much. So that part of your story just stuck so close to me. And now you have the Intensive Institute. I know you're doing a podcast. You do a lot of coaching, corporate coaching, if I recall, with like how I describe you as like you'll come in and like figure out who is a good fit for different positions. How am I doing?
You're doing pretty well, actually. Yes, the origin story is that I was laid up on my back. I had an idiopathic rupture of my L3-L4 disc, which is probably too much information, but I couldn't. What that means for people who haven't had a back injury is that I couldn't walk, I couldn't move. I was hopped up on painkillers, and so I was just lying there in bed. I literally could not even roll over without pain, and so I'm lying flat on my back, no pillow, on a like super hard futon, just trying not to move or breathe too much, honestly. And in those moments, like you first you think about how things are good, and then you might think about how things are bad, and then you might think about, if you're trained in coaching and ministry, you might start thinking about where the commonalities are, because of course as a coach we're conditioned to think, okay, well, what's the common factor? The common factor is me, so it's my fault. But then I said, hang on a second, hang on, because it's not just me, right? It's me and most of my closest friends, it's me and most of my best clients, it's me and most of the people I admire. So what is going on? What is happening that I keep getting called too much? And after a while, what I identified was this kind of cluster of behaviors. And then I, of course, went looking for the cluster of behaviors that was the other end of the spectrum, because if you have anything, it throws a shadow. And once I established that and started talking about it, amusingly enough, on Facebook, people started responding and started to really feel a resonance. And I was not used to getting that kind of engagement on Facebook at that time. And so I took notice. And next thing I know, I had written a whole bunch. And then I looked up and it was like, well, you have about 50, 60,000 words. And I was like, well, then I might as well write the rest of it and finish the book.
That's the hardest part, I imagine, is the rest of it. Is it one of those 80-20 rules where like the first...
Yes. Well, so the 80-20 rule didn't kick in until I was in the editing phase. But I was still laid up. So I would wake up in the morning and I would like roll out of bed and crawl to the bathroom and then slide back into bed and lie down flat on my back with my Bluetooth keyboard in my lap and my phone suspended over my face in off a boom mic stand. And I would just type for an hour every day for an hour, which is the most unintensive thing I can think of. Like, that is not how intensives behave every day, disciplined, the same thing. But because I was doing it first thing and because it was fresh in my mind and because I couldn't really do anything else, it happened to work. And that 80-20 rule, which for the listeners that don't know, that's you get 80% of the way through a project, and then you know that it could be done, how it could be done, and that you could do it. So the mystery's gone, challenge is gone, you're not interested anymore, and you just walk away from an 80% completed project.
Okay, I just brought Dax into the camera for those that are not watching the video, and Dax and Leela have a very special relationship. So I knew there was going to be a moment when Dax would want to come up, and I was going to be like, let's reintroduce the two of you.
Hi, buddy. Yeah, we got to meet when I was on the book tour, and I stayed with you when you were still living in Michigan.
Yeah, the underground house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a really cool house.
It was a really cool house. I miss it in some ways, and I also love being free from it.
Yeah.
It's a both and.
Yeah, underground houses are a special commitment.
Yeah. When I moved out, I realized how much mold was in that house, and it probably was really bad for me. But God, I love that house. We should back up. We've mentioned intensives. I think it's a pretty intuitive word to know what it means, but I think that let's define intensives and the counterpart expansives, and then let's pause for a moment and take care of business and do our "we're not really strangers" card, because I start every one like this. So intensives and expansives.
So intensives are people who are intense. We go like hell and we rest like the dead. We have what I call a phasic work cycle, which means we don't do slow and steady an hour every day things very often. Mostly we go like hell for 14 hours a day for 4 days, and then we sleep for a week. And whether we do that or not depends on whether we're into something. We're all either all in or all out. So we're the kids who get like 3 A's and 2 F's in school because we are absolutely not interested in working on the things we're not interested in. And then we get comments like, not living up to full potential. No, I'm living up to my full potential. My full potential does not involve your class. That's all. We tend to be very opinionated. We tend to make wild, kind of unexpected connections between things that nobody else can perceive those connections between. And so we show up in a meeting at work and we're like, okay, all right, so we should do this. And everyone looks at us like, we should what? And we're like, no, you don't understand. We should do this. It's going to work. I promise. And they're like, how? Do you have data? Do you have charts? Have you done analysis? And we're like, no, I just know. You just have to trust me.
An intensive with a firm gut instinct, right? Like power, is it either a power couple or is it incredibly dangerous? Yes.
Yes, because we know that we're usually right. We don't know why we're usually right, but it teaches us to kind of blow off people who disagree with us or who push back at us. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes that allows us to innovate. We are the disruptors, like intrinsically, that's who we are. And it can mean that when there's a warning sign, when there's a problem, especially a problem between us and a member of our community or our team or our company, that we won't listen because we're so conditioned not to listen. And what we have to do is gather a group of other intensives around us that we trust enough that when they say, oh, no, stop, back up, you got to go apologize to that guy, that we can hear it coming through our natural resistance to being told that it's impossible. Because everybody tells us stuff is impossible all the time, and then we go do it. So we really need a trusted cluster of advisors around us to make sure that we don't do that so much. When we do, like when intensives go bad, we get Elon Musk.
I remember when you used to describe intensives. I'm going to go back to like 2016.
Yeah.
And probably almost word for word quote you, because I say this like when people look at me like, well, how do I know? And I'm like, oh, okay. So an intensive, when you call up your intensive friend because you just had this really exciting news drop in your lap and you're like, hey, I have this great news to share with you. Your intensive friend is going to be like, oh my God, dinner's ready. Come on over. Let's talk. I can't wait to hear. And your expansive friend, the other side of this, is going to go, that's so great. In 2 weeks, we should get coffee. that's how I remember you
Yes.
talking about this, right? And that the intensive, you learn everything about them in 2 hours, and it might take you 2 years to learn the same information from an expansive. So that's how I remember the most basic way of what is the difference between these two? And it's like the Kinsey scale, where most people are going to be somewhere in the middle, right? It's not, it's a spectrum. It's not you're intensive or you're expansive. It's where do you fall in
intensive
certain
or
ways?
expansive, but you're not necessarily a 10 or a 0.
Right. Yes.
But most people fall to one side or the other of 5, which is actually a true in the middle. So you might be a 6, which means that you're sometimes pretty intensive. You get really into stuff. You can get really focused on one project and dive into it for a while. But you can see the benefit of some of the expansive tactics. When you need it, it's pretty easy for you to be I'm just going to do a little of this every day. That'll be fine. Right. Whereas a 9 is going to be oh my God, I feel sick just thinking about doing it that way.
So this was the interesting thing. So I'm an 8, at least I've only tested once. I don't know if you've found that people have retested and land different places at different times in their life.
I don't have retest information on people.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I haven't even thought about retesting, but right as we were getting on this call, I was I wonder if I still would be an 8. I've changed a lot, and I wonder if I took that test again, if I would answer things differently, and I might score higher because now I'm more integrated with myself and maybe masking less, and this evolution, right? But with Paul, I remember going through the test with him because there was a part of me that was the way he relationships is so expansive.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, I should say in romantic relationships, he's very expansive. But you talk to the man about video games or something he's super passionate about, he's just not super passionate about relationships, right? So he moves at a very different pace. And so it was interesting to watch him kind of toggle back and forth in how he would answer those questions.
Yeah. And, I wrote the assessment with the best information and knowledge that I had at the time. And I'm not a social scientist. So that assessment is a course tool at best. But it does give people, a lot of times people read the book, or people talk to me, or people see a video of me or whatever, or they hear me reference it in conversation, and they go and take the assessment. And then they're like, I don't know, that was a little weird. Or they'll say I came out of it with this number, but that just doesn't feel right. And I will tell people across the board, if your number doesn't feel right, figure out what number does feel right. At least it gives you a place to jump off from.
Yeah, I think it was okay. Do we have more to say about
expansive? Do you want to
go
back into expansives?
Yeah, let's go to expansive, because I do want to stay on some kind of track here, because I know we could just I would love to just meander, but I do want to do a card with you, so I want to make sure I make space for that. But explain expansives, because I've kind of already explained it a little bit. But
so expansives are at the other end of the spectrum. Expansives are the slow, steady. If we're thinking about the story of the tortoise and the hare is the intensive and the tortoise is the expansive. And that's how a lot of our cultural narratives go. I'll just insert that piece, that the virtuous way to be, the right way to be, the adult way to be is the expansive. So we really have to watch out for expansive bias when we move through the world. Expansives are the ones that putting everything in a neat little row. Expansives are often the ones who have not only do they have a bullet journal, but they have a ruler with their bullet journal, and they use the ruler to cross things out. They're the ones who often we find them very happy being things like accountants, things that are steady and predictable are the realm of the expansive. And we need that in the world. I think often when people hear me talk about intensives with such joy and love, they think I must not like expansives, but that's not true. I love my expansives. In work relationships, I love my expansives because they love to do the stuff I don't love to do.
We need them.
Yes, desperately. We need each other. Intensives are willing to ideate and go out on a limb and have these connections that I was talking about earlier, have, all kinds of unexpected things, risky things. Intensives tend to be pretty risk tolerant. Expansives aren't. Expansives do not wish to be in risky situations. They do not wish to have their heart rate elevated. They would like everything to stay in this fairly narrow emotional expression range, whereas intensives are like this. They're this huge wave. And so because the amplitude of the wave for expansives is so narrow, they also don't want to encounter something that makes that wave jump unexpectedly. So if I want to get the attention, say I'm doing marketing and I want to get the attention of someone who's intensive, I'm going to tell a story that's emotionally engaging, that, either tugs at your heart and makes you feel a little sad or a little excited or a little whatever, because I know that that's how intensives connect often to work, to stories, to material. Expansives, I'm not going to do that. Like, there might be a nice little feel-good story that's like a cupcake size, but we're not doing an entire banquet table full of desserts. That just doesn't make sense for expansives. And expansives are going to want stuff that's like regular, like every Tuesday at 3:00, the thing arrives. Intensives don't want to hear from you unless you've got this huge big thing to say, and then they'll spend the time to find out what it is.
I'm like creating my ideal client avatar in my head as you're talking right now, because I'm like, oh yeah, I really like the intensive clients. Like, they're my jam.
Yeah, which is how I started. I was like, who are my best clients? Oh, they're all the same people. They're all these intensive people. So expansives are like soothing, reliable, steady, calm. Like, all of those are things that we think of as expansives, and intensives are conditioned to think expansives are boring, and expansives are conditioned to think that intensives are irresponsible. And that conflict causes so much discord.
It's so interesting because all those qualities that you just listed for expansives are totally my qualities, and I'm totally an intensive. But that's what I bring to my work, is that it feels weird to me now that I'm like, how do I do that? As I'm just like trying to like connect the dots in my brain, like, how do I show up as all those things? Because I really value those things, and that's probably the biggest thing I bring into my work is those things. So it's an interesting, like, it's just going to leave me thinking.
I think, do you mind if I reflect a little bit on that?
You can, yes, the floor is yours, my dear.
So I think that one of the things I know about you is that you have this deeply, almost maternal, nurturing quality to your work, specifically your work.
Mm-hmm.
And my experience of you, although we haven't spent time in person in a while, my experience of you is that outside of your work context, outside of your professional context, your intensiveness is much more visible.
Yes.
And I think what happens often with intensives is that if we are intensively carrying that value set, we intensively care, often we will create a work. I'm hesitant to use the word persona because it sounds fake, and we're not good at being fake, but we will surface those particular qualities, and that will become kind of how we are at work.
That makes sense.
I see this a lot in my clergy colleagues too. And so you put on your professional hat and you're working with a client, and you just reach down and you have this deep, grounded, nourishing way of being with people, and that's what they come for, and you provide it, and then you take off that hat and you get to be everything else.
Well, it's the space is for the client, right?
Right.
I'm not coming in with my own needs, right? Like,
Right.
I have boundaries and in certain, like, things I won't do, but like for 99% of that space is all about for the client, as long as I'm a mutual yes for them, right? So that makes total sense, because I always think part of my work is very relational, and I'm like, inside of the work container, that is nothing what my relationship actually looks like, because I'm not coming in with my giant feelings, right? I'm not coming in like, my clients have no idea. They think of my giant feelings as I often cry with my clients. Right. I was in a session yesterday, and my client wasn't even crying over the story that she was sharing with me, but it was just, I'm a huge, like, over empathizer. And I'm just like, oh, I felt it. And I'm just like, tears are just streaming down my face as she's telling me a story. So big feelings that way, but not in like I'm always intensely working on myself and connecting dots and pausing people. I just told this story earlier, like, post sex. Okay. Imagine Michelle has an orgasm. She sits up and goes, oh my God, let me tell you a story. Because I'm downloading in the moment, right? Like, those are things I probably held back for a long time that I was always capable of. But part of this, like, as we're going to come back to talk about here, is how it has Leela in this idea of intensiveness kind of set me free in so many great ways. So I'm going to pause this conversation. I want to bring in a card. Okay. I pulled this card. I don't remember what it was, but I thought at the time, well, this makes sense for us. Okay. And you can tell me, you get consent here, Leela. I want to say, you can say, Vito, I'm not answering this. And I would be like, thank you for taking care of yourself. I totally love this. Okay. If you could prescribe me one thing to do for the rest of this month, what would it be? And I thought, Leela is always onto some interesting shit. And like, I am like kind of really curious what you would prescribe me.
I think I need to know what you feel like a couple of your deep needs are right now.
Somebody asked me what I would ask Santa for.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we want to say world peace and all these things,
but really,
right? But ultimately, if Santa could help me figure out how to market, how to actually describe what it is that I do, just give me like one line of what it is I do, I would be so freaking grateful. That is one thing that I need. Another thing I need is I need to release control of taking care of every little thing in my life and let some other people do it for me. That would be another thing I'm kind of working on right now.
So I just had the pleasure last week, I don't know, time is wobbly, of going to my hypnosis instructor, Melissa Tiers, did a free class on self-hypnosis and specifically rapid inductions because she's a New Yorker. And so nobody wants to wait around for, 5 minutes of induction. They're going to be on to something else. And
especially intensive.
And so she did, and the first induction she had us work with was a fractionation induction, which, I mean, we're way off in the weeds for your listeners probably, but fractionation is when you come out of trance and go into trance and come out of trance and go into trance repeatedly. And it makes it easier to get deeper into trance the more you do it. And so she just had us open our eyes and close our eyes and feel a wave of relaxation. Open your eyes and close your eyes and feel a wave of relaxation like 10 times, which produces, at least for me, a very lovely, very predictable kind of trance state. And then she invited us to see ourselves in a movie and to put in that movie screen something that we wanted to be or do and see ourselves doing it. And then see what the next tiny step was and see ourselves doing that. So my invitation to you would be to do that once a day for 30 days and see what happens.
Okay. Is there a place where I can go like or do I just play back this instruction from you and that'll be a guidance for me to do it? Like
no, that wasn't, if I wanted to actually induce you into trance, I would do a better
job.
No,
I know. Like, would it be like, you're like, there's a recording out there that I can send your way? Or is this just a hypothetical? Like, this would be the thing I would love to see you do for 30 days.
There are lots of recordings on the internet that will help you get into trance if that's something you're interested in, and we can talk about it more offline.
I remember when you were doing training, because we did a thing one time on Zoom. Do you remember that? It's a long time ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. So I would be happy to help you with that. But for people who knew hypnosis, I wanted to just outline what we were doing. But
gotcha.
It's a very effective and very simple trance induction. And once your brain is kind of soft and melty in trance, it's so much easier to understand what you need, to understand who you are, to make change. Because as she says in her pre-talks, our minds are divided between the conscious, which is like 10%, and the unconscious, which is like 90%. And often we run into this wall when we're trying to make change. And she's like, this is what trance does. Just bends that wall over so you can just walk your thoughts right in.
I have done that pretty productively, consistently through sex, like orgasm in general, but certain specific, like getting there through certain types of touch is like, it's become like a go-to. Like, I have something I need to work on. This will help me figure it out, because it lowers something. Or, psilocybin is a nice one too, but that takes a little bit more of a commitment.
There are lots of ways to get through that wall. Mm-hmm. What I like about this one is that it's really easy.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, I don't want to have to do a mushroom trip to have to do that.
I really love sex, but it's sometimes really complicated for me. So
Yeah.
it's not always the best energy to bring into like discernment or manifestation or any of those other kinds of energies. And this is just so easy, and it's so light in the sense of not being fraught. So,
Thank you. I was like, what do I offer Leela as what would I prescribe to you for
yeah,
30 days? Like, what am I been really excited about lately? There's a couple of things, and we were talking before this, you don't really do caffeine. So I don't want to like offer you up this mushroom coffee that I'm really loving right now. I'm an information hound. Like I have to be feeding my brain all the time. And so one of those easy, like usual brain food sources is Huberman Lab podcast. I don't know if
oh
you've,
yeah, it's been
yeah.
recommended to me like 3 times in the last month, so I now have to go listen to it.
Okay. So sometime I think it was in December. No, it was in November because I remember talking about this over Thanksgiving. So it had to have happened in November. Did an episode on this one specific type of journaling that they've shown is scientifically like proven that it helps your immune system. And I was like, oh, I perk up. I always like this kind of journaling and health and whatever. And so in this protocol, you take a traumatic memory and you write about it for 15 to 30 minutes, or you can type it. Either way shows the same results. You write everything down you can remember from this memory and how you felt, like truthful, like not sugar coated, not just like whatever your experience is the fact, right? That just the
Mm-hmm.
facts. Like write everything down you know. Anything else that comes up related to that memory, write for 15 to 30 minutes. And then you either do that once a day for 4 days or you do it once a week for 4 weeks. And it's shown, I think what's happening is memory reconsolidation during
Mm-hmm.
that time, right? But they've got the data to show how beneficial it is for your immune system, and I just think that's a cool thing that I want to share with
Awesome.
you.
Thank you. That's
Yeah,
fascinating.
and
Now,
it
of
makes
course, I'm
sense.
all
Like it.
kinds of curious.
Well, I tried to do it. I'm really bad at holding patterns that long. Like I'm like, oh yeah, I'll do it, and then I fall off because I'm an intensive.
Because intensive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it the same memory 4 times?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because every time it's gonna feel different, right?
Right.
You'll basically experience it get less and like less activating,
Mm-hmm.
right, as you go through it. So that's why I think it's like I took a class on memory reconsolidation earlier this year, and it was on the neuroscience of memory reconsolidation, which is what's at play when we do EMDR. It's what's in play
Right.
when we do internal family system. It's like all the therapy kind of stuff really goes back to how are we getting to this reworking our memories. It happens in cuddle space, like it
Right.
happens all over the place. And the formula for this, and I love a good formula, is like regulated nervous system plus just a little bit of activation equals your mismatch system kicks in and goes, wait a minute, I thought the world worked this way. This is challenging that, like subcortical memory from like our childhood, right? And
Right.
that's the formula, right? So I'm like, oh, this is just that, right? This is another way to access that.
Yeah, Melissa talks about that a lot in her trainings. And she's like, every time you remember something, it's like you rewrite the story and it overwrites the previous file.
Mm-hmm.
So if you narrate, and if you continually narrate the same story, then you reinforce those neuronal pathways. But if you allow the story to shift, or if you, like when we do memory reconsolidation work in trance spaces, we will deliberately shift the emotional tenor of a space. We won't say that what happened didn't happen, but you might say, okay, now imagine your adult self coming in well resourced
Right.
and doing something different, offering the little version of you some resource that you didn't have before. And it changes what the emotional hooks are that are on that memory.
Yeah. So between that and like, have you read Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving?
Not yet. I
Okay.
I'm familiar with his work, but I haven't gotten like all the way through I
What
just
are the
haven't had very good
things,
concentration.
what are the like highlights, like the Cliff Note version the stuff that I really love is one thing was like verbal ventilation when you're like verbally telling the story, right? It's great for you as long as you stay away from the critic. So telling the story without the critical aspect of it, super great for you. You bring in the critical voice, not great for you, right? And then like the critical voice shows up as an inner or outer critic, whether you're criticizing yourself
Mm-hmm.
or someone else, he says is like a sign that you're in an emotional flashback.
Mm-hmm.
So as I've got that data, when I feel that the critic is really rare for me now, like I've gotten to a point where I notice when the critic shows up, it's not a regular thing that I have going on. So you kind of got to be to a place where it's not something that's
Mm-hmm.
happening all the time. That your brain is a safe space. Now when it shows up, I'll go, oh, okay. So where's the emotional flashback happening? Right. And
Mm-hmm.
tie those two together. And it makes like I had a regular thing that was happening for me. And when I was able to connect those dots with that information, I was like, doesn't happen anymore. I don't hear
Yeah.
that little voice show up. And it's like, oh, okay. It's just been rewritten. It's good stuff. So we answered the card. We can get back to business now. Thank you, Leela, for playing with me.
Of
Um,
course.
yeah. So you wrote the book in 2016, or you wrote it before that. I know you went on tour in 2016.
Yeah, it came out in 2016.
For me, that book was like the first place, like almost like looking in a mirror, where I was like, oh, you're saying all these things I see in myself are okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like things started to like it feels so isolating, life does, right? Like we don't know other people's experience. And like the book was like a way of being like, oh, this is actually a really common experience, even though I think if I remember, did you used to say like in our culture it's like 30% intensives?
Yeah, I still think that the intensives are about 30% of the population, and of that 30%, only about 10% are really self-aware because we absolutely could not cover it up, and the other 20% have spent most of their lives trying to cover it up. And so part of my mission is to help that 20% of people figure it out and help the other 10% feel like you do now, that it's okay, that these are gifts, that this is just who we are, and that there's no judgment that needs to be attached to that.
I just always felt like I was too much. My feelings were too much. Like how I shared was too much. Those are the like two things that really stick out. But like I joke that I'm the person that gets an idea in the shower, and by the end of the afternoon the website's up. Right?
Absolutely.
Like yeah. Like that's totally me. And I used to like I don't have any judgment about any of those things anymore. I'm a crier. I used to get on calls when I first started with Cuddlist, and when I was operations manager, there'd be so many times I'd be in leadership meetings and I'm in
Mm-hmm.
tears. And thankfully, that's a community that is very emotionally intelligent. And they're like, it's awesome. And I'm like, I'm embarrassed. No, this isn't right. Right. Like, I
Uh-huh.
shouldn't have to do this. And now I'm like, yeah, look at me. I'm a badass. I fucking cry all the time. Like, it's just different. Like, it's just an accepting of my like self.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we're taught so much of being intensive is unprofessional and irresponsible, and so many other things that start with ear or un.
Mm-hmm.
and there's a whole piece that I talk about sometimes that ties it all into racism, right? Because there's definitely systemic racism that comes in as part of it. But even if we don't discuss that right now, like this idea that correct ways of behaving are coded, are like coded language for expansiveness, and incorrect ways of behaving are coded language for intensiveness, and that incorrect behavior and children's behavior is often tied together. Like there's so many interesting societal norms and ideas that are embedded, and so much of it ties back to intensiveness or expansiveness, which is part of why I felt like we needed to have language around it.
Yeah, I was just numb. Like, I look back now, and part of my like pulling away like the shell of me, like who is the chrysalis that will come out kind of thing. Like I remember having a moment. So I would say that when I was married the first time, I didn't cry. Like I had to look for a sad movie, because I would feel a need to cry, but that was the only way I could get it out. And then I got divorced, and I think that there wasn't the whatever pressure Jason had on me. I don't know that he even would say now that he felt any way about me crying, but I felt it probably carried over from my childhood also, because my dad was like, you can argue with me unless you cry. Like the minute you cry, we're done. Like
What
we're
a
not having this
fascinating rule.
conversation. Yeah, I know, right? Like if you're adult enough, kind of, that
Right.
was the
And
messaging.
adulthood means you're not emotional, and not being emotional means you don't cry, right? So this, like, we don't have express our feelings in a big way is expansiveness, but we
Yeah.
call it being mature.
Yeah. Yeah. So fast forward, I'm coming out of this 20-year relationship, not having fully grieved my mother's like the loss of my mother. All these, I have so many, like I say, like the big adult things that people go through. I got through most of them in my 20s. Like I just feel like I got hit over and over again. But I didn't really get to process all of that. And then I come out and I find myself just crying everywhere. Like I can't keep it in for anything. And I just realize it's just so much bottled up. But there was this moment when I got into the BDSM world, and I asked somebody, could somebody push me, like push my limits? I was experimenting with impact play. And one of the first people I met in the community was a pretty decent sadist. Like he was like, the joke was like, there is no warm up. His hand is not the warm up. That is like his hand on its own is enough, right? And I'm sitting in his basement. I'm on like a spanking bench, and there's a mirror right in front of me, and I am bawling, right? And I look at myself and I go, this is worth crying about, right? Like it's like my father would say, like, I'll give you something to cry about if we did cry. Like that was a threat. You're going to get spanked, right? And here I'm getting beat. Like, whoo, did I take a beating? And I was proud of myself, because look how strong I am. And this is legitimate tears, right? I've come a long way since then. It was just part of, I think, my reparative process. I don't enjoy pain anymore. I don't need a reason to cry. I can cry because I want to. I can cry because I'm happy. I can cry because I'm sad. I cry all the time for an orgasm out of my eyes, right? Like it's just another way of expressing myself. But it's so much deprogramming of this, like, and how does that affect your health? Like holding all of that in, thankfully, I'm so grateful that in my late 30s, I got to start to move through that process. And it wasn't something that either I never got to address, or that happened later or whatever. Like I look at my mom died when she was 50, and I'm 48 now. And so much of our life really was the same path until it wasn't. And in like how much of that affected her, if she was probably also an intensive. And very squished. Like my grandparents were very much squishy parent, like would want to squish her. She was
silent generation culture was really very squishy. And so not in the soft, squishy, squishmallow sort of way, but in the I will squish your intensiveness until you can't find it anymore kind of way. And so those of us who have either very late silent generation or early boomer parents often see that like, and then when we look back across that, it's like, oh, well, it wasn't great, but at least I understand why it happened.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have figured it out when you look at other people that haven't figured it out. Right? That the Stoics, the very like everything is buttoned up, kept back. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled, delighted that I've gotten to where I am. But it's been a process. It's been an interesting process. And it's funny for me to pull the word squish out. I just realized like that's like something I used to hear you say all the time, like a squished intensive. And I'm like, whoa, look at me. I'm like having like interesting like memory, like pulling up memories from years ago, from when we used to talk about this a lot.
Yeah.
And I know you talk about it a lot. I mean, this is your baby.
It is, although I've talked about it, I think, less directly in the last couple of years, because one of the things that I realized, you talked about marketing earlier, and like I too would like Santa to bring me the perfect marketing phrase. But one of the things that I've recognized is that while teaching this framework is a lot of what I do, it's still what I do. A lot of the corporate training I do is like, okay, here's the basic framework. What do you think you are? How does that mean that you interact with other people on your team? How does that mean you interact with your supervisors or the members that you supervise, the team members you supervise? That's a how. And in marketing, we talk about the results, don't talk about how you achieve those results. So I haven't been talking about it as much. But I think I may be moving back toward talking about it a little more directly, because I have a membership and it hasn't been particularly robust. Like, I don't have a lot of people signed up. But especially as so many of our independently employed colleagues are going back into the traditional workforce, I don't know if you've seen this in your circles, but in my circles, tons of people who have been entrepreneurs for a while are applying for and getting jobs and going back into traditional employment. I feel like there's this moment, especially for intensives, where, okay, you're going to have your honeymoon. It's going to be 2 weeks. It's going to be 6 weeks, whatever it's going to be. And then you're going to start to feel the friction.
Yeah.
And at that moment, if I can give you these tools, if we can have a place to talk about it, then that transition can be stronger for you, because I'm not going to tell people that they shouldn't go back to having a job and like some stable paycheck situation. That's great. I think that people who can should, but these tools are really useful for making that a smooth transition, for helping to ease those relationships and strengthen those relationships and keep the, Gottman's four horsemen out of the workplace. We don't want them in our personal relationships either, but we definitely don't want them in the workplace.
So are you saying that, like, to talk about it from this direction will help people understand that they are that, so that they can find the support? Is that why you haven't been talking? Like, have you not been talking about it from the stance of like, here's how you know if you're an intensive, here's how you know if you're an expansive? Am I following the...
Yeah, I haven't been talking specifically about the basics of the framework. And part of that is because I wrote classes and offered classes, and for a while they were for sale. Now I still have to relaunch them on the new platform. But part of that was just because I felt like I had saturated my audience. The people who were listening knew, and nobody else was listening because, yay, algorithms. So I just stopped giving the basics. And because when you're working with, as an kind of an internal consultant with a team in a corporation, I would bring that as part of the beginning of the training. The 101 thing is like the first session. I usually do about 6 sessions with the company. And the first session is typically the 101. And the second session is typically, okay, so everyone in the room, what are you and how is that affecting your dynamics?
Yeah.
And then I move on to specific applications. How does this affect your marketing? How does this affect your hiring? How does this affect your job descriptions? All that other stuff. And finally, how does getting your needs met affect your ability to hold to your ethical standards? Which is, for me, the really juicy part.
Yeah, I see you swimming in the ethic conversations online all the time.
Because it's so important. And I think there are so few like ladders into that conversation for the average person. Like, I went to seminary, but if you're not in a couple of very rarefied environments, there's no easy way into that conversation. And it really does have to do with, are your needs getting met? Because if your needs aren't getting met, you're building resentments. If you're building resentments, those become the foundation for bending the rules just a little bit, just this time. And we see that in relationships too. I mean, I'm sure you see it in your work. I'm in my marriage and I have this commitment or this promise or whatever, and my needs aren't getting met. And so I'm just going to justify to myself that it's okay for me to go try and meet that need in a different way.
This
that
is
might
what I
not
hear.
be within my agreement.
We're the best of friends. And I'm like, but does she know you're here?
Yeah.
You're not that really good friends if you're going behind your wife's back. Right? Like, you're roommates. You're not even friends. Like, I don't know. Then I could get into my whole, like, if this isn't working for you, just renegotiate your relationship. Like, it should be easy for everyone, right? Simple.
Right. Sure.
Yeah,
That's not a
sure.
big deal.
No,
Not for people raised
it's
in
an
like
easy conversation.
straight hetero monogamy world.
Yeah, we just queer everything and we would be in such a better place.
I mean, I often think that's true, that even if you're going to end up back in a straight relationship, if it's an examined straight relationship, even if you're going to end up back being cis, if it's an examined gender, that's a wildly different circumstance.
I'm in a monogamous relationship right now. People hear me talk about non-monogamy on here all the time. Not all the time, but I do mention other people and partners and whatnot every once in a while. But we're in a monogamy phase right now. And like, I like the fluidity of like, let's just keep renegotiating things, because then we're never stuck in one rigid way that my partner isn't coming to me and telling me when things aren't going well and they're running to some professional to get their needs met because they won't talk to me. Like, that doesn't happen in my relationship.
Right.
We would just renegotiate it.
Right. I mean, ideally, when you're in a relationship, no matter how many people are involved, if your needs aren't getting met, or if you're having a hard time or whatever, you go to the people or person you're in a relationship with and you say, hey, listen, I need X. And then everybody's like, okay, let's collaboratively problem solve for X.
Yeah. But like you're saying, in the corporate world, it's the same thing. If people aren't getting their needs met, I listen to, my oldest son now works for one of the big guys. I won't name names.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud of him as a homeschooling mom that let him kind of do whatever the fuck he wanted to do, that he's found, his version of success, right? But
or a version that works for now.
Well, for now, right. We have these conversations of like, yeah, you're 26 years old and you're really questioning what you want in career. You're just doing it before everyone else. Like, other people would be doing this at 40, right? Of what is success? Is it the money number, or is it your culture where you work, or, how you spend your free time, or like,
and maybe this like financial backing that you build up for yourself now at 26 will give you the freedom to make some different choices later, and that'll work out well for you.
So I get to watch what this company, how they treat their employees, and I'm just like, how is that supposed to turn out for them? Like, it's not building goodwill. It's not. It's same thing. My other son works for another big company that might serve coffee, and the shit they do in the backside of. And it's a company that has this false, people see them falsely as being this progressive company, and it's not true. And how long can they sustain that? In what does that do overall when all of your employees resent being there? It's gross.
Like, I would love to have a local manager even bring me in somehow, I don't know, write a grant, bring me in and train their coffee shop team, because that coffee shop would be a better place to work than most of the other coffee shops in that chain or that branch or whatever.
It's like there's no investment in longevity. It's like, we know that turnover is expensive.
We do. It costs an entire year's salary to replace most people. Not quite as much at the lower levels of pay, but especially as you go up the chain.
Yeah.
If you lose a software engineer, it costs you that person's salary, that person's salary to replace them.
Yeah, we keep joking that he'll be the young one to unionize a store.
I mean,
and I couldn't be a prouder mama if that happens.
That would be awesome. Your other kid could also unionize.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah, I don't think he's that invested. But the younger one, he has my heart. He's very like social justice minded, and he debates whether he wants to be a therapist or he wants to go into law and work in politics and in policy, and like, he's just big hearted, and what will he do with it is the other question. They're both intensives for sure.
Yeah.
My ex-husband, he was an intensive too, and long lineage.
Yeah.
I might have accidentally done okay with the two.
I mean, my impression is that you did great with them, and that, there are problems in parenting no matter who you are, right? Like, it doesn't matter. But that when intensive kids have understanding intensive parents, that it actually works out okay, because some part of the kid recognizes that it's okay to be intensive.
I think the fact that we ended up homeschooling, because my oldest has type 1 diabetes and the school system was just really fucking with us when he was really young, that just opened up so many options for him as far as like, I'm really laid back as far as the school side of things. Once I deprogrammed from what you're supposed to do, like the rigidness of like, you're supposed to know all these things. When I had a homeschool mom, I got involved with the hippies. Mm-hmm. Right. First, I found the Christian homeschoolers and I had to run the other direction because I wouldn't sign their statement of faith.
Right.
Caused a lot of problems. It was kind of fun. I found the hippies, and the hippie moms were like, look, all your kid needs to know how to do is find the answer.
Right.
Make sure he's well-resourced and you're going to be good. And so I was like I wasn't an unschooler in the sense that we were completely free range, mm-hmm. but I was like, okay, I would feel better if we at least get these core things like reading, writing, and arithmetic, like 3 mm-hmm. R's that aren't ours, right? If we can just make sure we do those, and then the rest of it, you just do what, like, either you're coming to me and telling me what you want to teach me. That was what I did with my second one. That was super mm-hmm. brilliant of me because I hate planning and plotting. And I was like, so what are you interested in? What are you going to teach me about this year? And he's like, Mom, I'm so into World War II. And I'm like, great. Like, he would just tell me all the things, right? The older one, he was into Minecraft. That was mm-hmm. the big deal. And he used that to learn how to program. And he made this really successful mod back in the mm-hmm. day where he was getting recognition from YouTubers and really cool stuff. And I was a little That's awesome. Worried, like, oh God, is he going to get hit with like bullies and like a lot of negative feedback? And it didn't happen for whatever reason. And he turned that into a love for programming, and he just self-taught. So here's a kid that's self-taught, went to community college, got his associates, but only because he was working there and it was free, and didn't have great self-esteem. Like that was where I kind of dropped the ball in their younger years because I was a very emotionally immature parent, and we're trying to make up for that, I guess. Like, I don't know if maybe nobody comes out of childhood with great self-esteem. I don't know. But he says to me one day, he's worked at the community college. He moved on to a credit union as a programmer there for a little while. And he says, Mom, I'm really bored. Like, I'm starting to question if I could actually do more than I think I can. Like, I'm capable of more than what I've been doing because I just haven't had anything to gauge myself against. He goes, I think I might want to apply to one of the big guys. And I said, oh, do you think you should stay at this job for a little bit? Like, I feel like you just, like, he was maybe there for like 2 months, right?
He was bored. No, he was an intensive.
He was bored out of his mind. It was work from home, and he was like, I get all my work done on Monday. Like, what do I do for the rest of the week? And he's like, I'm just applying, Mom. I'm just going to see what the process is like. And wouldn't you know it, he got a fucking job, right? Like, and he's like, oh, I'm actually it really helped him see himself from somebody else's perspective of like, actually, I'm like the best guy on my team.
Yeah.
Like that says a lot, and that starts to build that. And I remember when I went to work for Catalyst in operations, it was nice to have somebody tell me I was doing a good job because I'd always been self-employed.
Right. And like, so you didn't have any feedback.
I didn't have any feedback. And to like have somebody else telling you you're doing a good job. Even I'm his mom, I can't even do that. Right. It doesn't mean the same. It doesn't carry the same weight. So I raised 2 intensives that are doing great things or potentially doing great things, as my youngest isn't quite old enough to have realized exactly where he wants to land. But it's cool to watch intensives like thrive.
Yeah. And it's wonderful to create spaces and systems and opportunities for intensives to thrive. Because like everybody should not grow up wrestling the system the way we did.
Well, I don't know if we know you can't get away from the system completely, right?
No, but you don't have
certainly having parents that are understanding is helpful.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between having to wrestle the system for like every last little drop of food and drink and recognizing, this is the difference between a squished intensive and a tempered intensive in a lot of ways. So a tempered intensive is one that knows they're intensive and knows in which context that's going to be a liability and makes a deliberate choice to not act so intensive in certain places at certain times because it doesn't meet their goals. And a squished intensive is someone who internalizes the judgments about intensiveness and tries not to be intensive because they think it's bad.
Yeah. So conscious intensiveness versus unconscious intensiveness.
To some extent, yeah. But also there's a kind of universality to squishedness. Squished people are usually trying not to be intensive everywhere. They think they're too much in their relationships. They think they're too much at work. They think they're too much in their family of origin. They think they're too much, if they have a hobby they're passionate about, they think that's too much and they're kind of shy and hiding it because, oh my God, what if somebody finds out that I have an entire room full of Legos or whatever?
Do they also apologize a lot?
All the time.
Okay. Because I'm like, I bet you they're my apologizers, the ones that come in and apologize a lot.
Yeah. I'm sorry I'm crying. I'm sorry I'm laughing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And you spend like the first 6 months that you know them going, it's okay. You don't have to apologize. No, you're fine.
I literally say, if you're not physically hurting me, you do not need to apologize to me.
Yeah.
That's the rule. It's like, unless you actually like physically harm me in some way. I mean, I'm resilient.
In a non-professional context, if you lash out at me, I would probably want an apology too. But like,
oh, sure. That doesn't happen in my space.
Right.
This is the love space. Like, we are all in our happy feelings or sad feelings, right? But we don't. Anger can show up a little bit in the sense of like, sometimes people really get a lot of grief and anger at like lost time, things like that. But it just doesn't, I mostly see like the grief side of the sadness side of the grief and just good feelings. Like, it's oxytocin, right?
Oxytocin is so yummy.
So yummy. Like, we come out of here just like, I'm like, don't sign any contracts. You're going to love everyone today.
Right.
Like, it's like, I'm Snow White, right? Like, it's just this, I don't deal with people being hurtful. They're not lashing out at me. They're more so sharing like frustration at other people and how they've been hurt.
Yeah.
But not at me. So I'm more like, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. That sounds horrible. And that should never have to happen to anybody. That's more so
that's the vibe.
Yeah. We don't need apologies in here, thankfully. Unless I step in it, which has happened.
Sometimes happens.
My intensiveness. In this case, definitely the one I'm thinking of was definitely an intensive thing. And then we got the opportunity of repair, which is such a wonderful opportunity to have. I don't recommend people purposely go out and look to step in it so that you can repair. But it's like the silver lining of, if it can go well, it can be such a healing process for the people involved in it, especially if you've never had anybody attempt to repair with you.
Yeah, there's so much healing possible in the kinds of cuddle spaces that you create. I think it's really transformative because I think there are some things you can't really learn out of a book. You can't really learn by theory. You have to learn by experience. You have to lay down the experiential pathways in your brain.
I got naked with a client yesterday. I think she reported that she's never actually seen another naked body or been naked in front of someone. Don't quote me on this. I might be off. But I think she even said, like, I don't even think I saw my previous husband naked. So I think I'm right here. Just being able to experience yourself in a container that is full of love and actually get to experience it in your body, being held.
Yeah. In
your natural state. Right? And being loved even in that state. Because we don't get a lot of spaces to just be loved on, and especially without clothing on. Right? Especially when those were spaces that were not safe in your past. Right? It's such a transformative space. And like, you can't even sometimes do that with a partner because there's too many things at play. Right? Like, this is the space just for this person, and all the energy is directed right at them. Right? I'm not coming in with my own stuff.
Right. They're not just there to meet your needs.
Nope. It's just to help them feel better in the body that they're walking this earth with, right? And to then be able to recognize, oh man, I feel really safe right now. Super cool. And she's an intensive, but
Speaking of
yeah,
things that you see in your clients.
yeah, I'm always recommending, like, as soon as my antenna goes off, because they come in and they start to tell me everything about their lives without hesitation, right? And I get this sense that they're not super positive about that aspect of themselves. I'm like, oh, I have a book for you. And I wish I could track. Like, I would love to know how many people I've referred to the book that actually have picked it up, because it comes out of my mouth still in 2024 now. I haven't said it this year except for in this conversation, but I know it'll come up with a client again. I know, it just started. It's just one of my, like, how to better love yourself books.
I love that. I love it.
Yeah.
When I wrote it, it was like, it felt like I had a mandate from the universe, because people kept resonating with it and people kept wanting it and people kept spontaneously applying it to things like their children and their partners and their mothers-in-law. So I love that you recognize it in your clients and that it's able to help, even if they don't buy the book. Like, I love it when people buy the book, but they don't have to buy the book. Even when you recognize it and you just name it and you give them that piece of information. This is a known thing. This is a way that people sometimes are. And you're not alone, and it's not bad.
Yeah. I'm here too. Like, in most of my work, it's like, me too. I've been through this too. I've been through this process. I've hated my body. Whatever the thing is that they're showing up for. I've had a hard time with orgasm. I've had, like, that's what I love about, like, I'm just like, I'm in it with, I've gone through it. I'm doing it. You can do it too. And let's talk about why you don't like fast food sex. It's in the book, right? Like, I love that chapter. And I've gone back to it a few times over the years. So, like, I share it with people, specifically that chapter of, like, trying to help people understand their sexuality and why some things don't work for them when it works for other people. And we're also comparative, right? We just want to put ourselves against what some kind of normal is.
Yeah. And I think we, especially with sex, because it's not 100%, but largely relational, it's almost impossible to escape whatever stories the other person brings into the room and into the bed or onto the couch or wherever. And that means that it's not just like, if you say, I don't like fast food sex, and then the other person's like, well, I don't know why. All my other partners were fine with fast food sex. Or they don't say that because they're trying to be respectful. They're not trying to be rude, but they're just baffled. But sex is fun, like snacks. We could go get snacks, we could go get an ice cream, or we could have sex. Either way, that's fine.
I think if, like, I could just get people to just figure out what they like, write their owner's manual, and just believe in themselves, and, like, not look at, like, who's right or wrong, but are we compatible?
Yeah. And do your owner's manual revisions, because you don't stay the same.
Leela, since we have last talked, oh my gosh, I'm just like, it's so funny to me, the things that I'm learning about myself. I keep saying, like, okay, I've heard the thing that we're all onions and we just have to peel layers and layers and layers, right? But let's say onions on, like, an apple peeler, where it's just this spiral thing, because, like, I'm just getting to know myself. I think it is somewhat that I've changed. But also, I think some of it is just, like, being able to get rid of enough of the junk that the true parts can come through. And, like, last year I learned that I have aphantasia, which means that I don't see pictures.
Imagine things, yeah.
Paul was like, I got to tell you about this thing I learned about. He comes in all excited, right? And we're at this, like, kinky board game weekend up in the, like, hills of West Virginia with some friends. And he's like, I just heard about this thing. He goes, I'm going to ask you a question. Tell me what you see. He goes, when I say red truck, what do you see? And I go, I see the words red truck. And he goes, no way. You're the thing I was just going to teach you about. And I'm like, what? And he's like, you don't see a red truck? And I was like, no. And he's like, you have aphantasia. And I'm just like, oh shit, this is, like, in backwards, like, oh, this is why when we went rock climbing and I said, hey, babe, could you help me with this knot? Because I can't tie in. I haven't climbed in a long time and I don't remember how to do it. And he goes, come on, Michelle, there's only 2 ways you can tie this knot. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? He's like, just try it. There's only 2 ways. And I go, could you just tie the fucking knot for me? Like, I got really mad. And he's like, whoa, looking back at it, he pulls up a picture of that knot.
Yeah.
I don't have that. Right. So it's like making things make sense.
Yeah. I get fully realized images or usually tactile, sensational memories.
Oh. See, I get a lot of, I can tell you how I felt.
I can tell you how the rope felt moving through my hands. That's how I learned to tie knots for rock climbing.
Okay. Well, I don't have either one of those. So but, I don't know if I'll ever become a rope top. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. But like if you became a rope top, you would need to figure out what the accommodations are, right? This is just like being an intensive and being like, okay, if I'm an intensive, I'm not going to plan to do an hour of whatever every day because it's not happening. If you wanted to become a rope top, you would like eroticize referencing a book or a picture or a series of instructions.
I would probably take a bunch of pictures and have a very specific, easy way to access them because I would need to pull that up.
You could have your rope bottom read you the instructions one line at a time.
I don't do it with reading. I would need to see a picture. Mm-hmm. But I have top for rope, to be fair. I just haven't really dove into it because it makes sense to me now why I struggled with it. Right. It makes sense to me why I felt like I was a bad top in general because visualizing a scene isn't something I can do. I don't fantasize, right? So that was an interesting thing. Yes.
Can I ask you a question?
Anything you want.
Do you enjoy any kind of erotic media?
I like audio. And I don't pursue any of it. It's so funny. Like, it's so not important, but yet I have recorded my own sex, like just the audio. Love it. I've listened to it over and over again. And if I was going to pick, like if you said you have these things to pick from, I would probably pick the audio file. Okay.
When you listen to the audio, how do you experience it?
So in the case of like the memory, like the ones of us, because that's the only one that comes to mind. I could picture is a weird sense. I could put myself back in that space and have the memory of that space, right? I can pull up an image if I try. It's just fuzzy, but I can remember the feelings. I could give you a play-by-play of what was happening in that moment.
So you have the feelings and the sequence, but not the image.
Mm-hmm.
Does that happen for you?
If I smoke pot, the image comes up easier.
Now I'm interested. Now I'm like, oh, that's an interesting, because it means that your brain doesn't actually not have the image available.
Right. I'm like, is this trauma?
Right.
Right. So then I'm telling this story on a podcast. Cool. Queer sex therapist up in Portland. I should totally connect you to. Also an intensive. I was on their podcast and was telling the story about having aphantasia. My sisters listened to the podcast. They both separately messaged me and go, oh my God, I think I have aphantasia too. So then I talked to the aphantasia people. I'm like, I commented on something on Instagram and I'm like, hey, so my sisters are identifying this way too. Is this normal? And they're like, actually, we're seeing a lot of like hereditary factors here. But also we grew up in the same house. Right. And it still could be a trauma response. And like all these things, right? So who knows? But I think it's fascinating, right?
Yes. I mean, brain geek to brain geek. Yeah. It's like, what are the things that allow us? Our brains hold so much and our brains can do so much. This is what got me into hypnosis. It's like, there's so much our brains can do. When I took that training in 2019 or something, like 2018, 2019, something like that, when I took my 8-day training, she showed us video of someone undergoing a C-section with nothing but hypnosis for pain.
Yeah.
Like the medical stories, if you go digging into the medical history of hypnosis, the things that have happened, our brains are so powerful. And then you look at things like people with DID or who are systems, and like some members of the system have diabetes. some members of the system do not have diabetes. How is that even a thing?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I'm remembering when we tried to do the hypnosis thing, and I think you had me at a door.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm like, I think I could visualize the door, but maybe I wasn't able to visualize it as well as maybe somebody else could have.
Yeah.
Right? Like I say, I have I can pull a fuzzy image up, but it's not the first thing that happens. It's like it takes extra work kind of thing.
Right. And knowing that about you, I would probably choose a less visual, like instead of having you picture yourself on a movie screen, I would have you like feel your way into something.
Right.
Because you've told me that feelings are a thing that you can recall.
Yeah. Oh, I can. It's so I can remember feelings so strongly.
Right. So I would key into that. I'd be like, you're going down a set of stairs and you can feel the uneven, worn texture of the wood under your feet as you go.
Yeah. Yeah. That I can I can embody that. So this year, that was last year's thing. And also I want to add, I have a colleague in DC who was one of the three out of 10 of us in this weekend all identified as aphantasia. It's supposed to be really rare. I don't know if 30% is that rare. But anyways, she's a surrogate partner, colleague of mine. She's another aphantasia person. So fast forward. So we have this thing together. I get a Marco Polo from her and she's like, hey, so I have this client that's asexual. And so she's also a LCSW. So she's like, I'm reading this book on asexuality so I can better serve my client. And I'm kind of relating to some of these stories. And she goes, I don't think I experienced sexual attraction. And I'm like, yeah, you say that. I don't think I do either. Because my sexuality is starting to get incredibly interesting for me. And the fact that it feels like it takes a lot of spoons. Like I'm really relating to responsive desire heavily. And I know that some of that's because I've been in a relationship for a long time and what have you. But when she says this, I'm like, yeah, I think that too, because I think I had sexual attraction one time and it scared the shit out of me. Like I have one thing to compare to that was so different of an experience where I walked into a party and I saw this man and I went, holy shit, I'm going home with him tonight. Like it was this, wow. It scared the shit out of me. And a girlfriend said, do you want to go shoot pool? Like leave this party? And I said, yes, get me out of here. It scared me because it was such an odd feeling for me. So when I look at that and I go, oh yeah, well, this makes sense. This is why I bring up Aubrey Lancaster. She was very helpful in helping me figure this out. I have lots of other attractions, right? I'm very sensually attracted. When I see somebody, I'm not thinking I want to have sex with them. I'm thinking, oh, I wonder what it's like to cuddle with them.
I want to touch them.
I want to be emotionally intimate. Like I want intimacy, but it doesn't translate initially to I want to have sex with this person. But my owner's manual that I've been so carefully crafting, I know that I can get to sexual desire, which is not about a person, right? This is what I learned from Aubrey. Sexual attraction is aimed at a person. Sexual desire is I want to have sex. So I know myself as I have this one friend and we have no sexual chemistry. Unfortunately, we've tried many times, not many times, enough times. But we like to cuddle. And when I'm cuddling with him, I still go, man, I like, this is feeling good. And I like I get to the desire part, but I know that we don't have the thing. Right. But with my husband, I'll say like, I like to have sex with him, but I don't think about it. So we know the dance is you get Michelle in bed with no expectations, because expectations are a real killer for me.
Right.
We start to touch, things start to feel good. I know there's this thing, if I do it to him, he makes this noise, right? The audible part of me kicks in. That turns me on. So arousal shows up and then sexual desire shows up, right? It's interesting to start to talk about this with people, especially people I've had sex with. And they're like, you're not sexually attracted to me? Like it's an ego hit kind of thing. And it's like, I'm not sexually attracted to anybody. Right? Which then makes my work extra interesting.
Yeah.
Or I think it made it easier in some ways.
Yeah.
Say that part again?
I said it probably creates capacity for it.
Yeah, in some ways it does. Except for where I'm at now, where I'm like, sexual spoons are hard to come by these days. Do I really want to spend them on my clients?
I've heard a lot of sex workers talk about that issue at various points in their careers. Like, at some points in their lives it was easy, and now it's like, it's a lot of work, and I'm willing to put the work in, but like not for a stranger, a relative stranger, not for a client, not for a business relationship. I find I've always been what people call demi, and you've probably heard me rant about calling it demi because it does not feel like a partial sexuality to me. And I feel like calling it half is weird. But I've always been like that. And it took me a long time to work out what was happening. Like for a long time, I was like, I guess I just don't want to date. And that's not true. But for me, what I need is I need the relationship first. And out of the emotional connection and the relationship comes a quality of sensuality. I can have very sensual, lovely, yummy, juicy cuddles with no sexual desire involved. But out of the relationship comes the sexual desire. And out of one of the things you talked about, responsive desire, one of the things for me is that out of being wanted doesn't seem to want specifically me or specifically something about what we have together. I'm not interested because for me, it's about the relationship. It's an expression of relationship.
Yeah, there's a term for that.
Yeah, there's so many terms.
Aubrey gave me this whole list.
I
and
can't
there
even
was like,
I'm
attracted to a person because they're attracted to me was one of the options. But you're saying maybe it's more than that.
Yeah, it's not. I have to like the person and be engaged in relationship with them, like some kind of relationship, not romantic relationship necessarily, first.
Mm-hmm.
Like there has to be emotional connection. If there's no emotional connection, it doesn't matter how attracted they are to me. And in fact, if someone is too attracted to me when I'm not attracted to them, then it's a turnoff and I don't even want to hang out with them.
Isn't it fun to figure these little like nuances? Or
it is.
Or maybe it's a burden. I don't know. But like, it's fascinating to me.
I'd rather know what's going on. I'd rather know what to expect. I'd rather know how to explain it to people. Mm-hmm. But the challenge is for me when I'm in a relationship that has some duration to it and that those like routine expressions of mutual desire drop off, then all of my creative energy, because for me, it's creative energy. All my creative energy goes other places. I have so many creative pursuits and I can just like pick up a sewing project or pick up a woodworking project or pick up a brand new art or pick up my brush and do some painting. Like I can do so much that if I won't even be thinking about it, but my energy will just go elsewhere. If the person I'm with, and like, I'll still love them, I'll still respect them, I'll still cuddle with them, like all of that other stuff will be easily present. But if they stop expressing interest in me, it just goes away.
Yeah.
Which is too bad because I really like sex.
Right. Like, I'm really glad that Paul and I have both taken a pretty conscious approach to it, and that he also doesn't have like a super, like we're both kind of very like, yeah, sex is great if we think about it. Like it doesn't, right. It's not on the top of our mind all the time. And, and we both like try to prioritize it, just because we know that otherwise we won't. If we're waiting for it to organically happen, it's probably not. But I also can't schedule sex, right? To me, we can schedule time to connect and it might turn into sex. And I feel very safe that if I don't get there, he's totally okay with that. Yeah. And it's just such a blessing to have that compared to my first marriage, which would have been whining and complaining and turning into a toddler. And,
yeah, that's not a great situation.
It's not a good look. It doesn't build more desire. Like it goes quite the other direction. Yeah. So that's like my two big, like, wow, Michelle, 47 and 48 have been very interesting for you. What's coming? Like, what am I going to hit by the time I hit 50? What's next? I'm kind of excited about it. I was like, what's the next iteration of me? And yeah.
I feel like there's the level of like when you're peeling the onion, the first few levels are just trauma. Mm-hmm. At least for a lot of us, it's just trauma. And there's trauma piling up around you and sort of rotting around your feet as you keep peeling and you're tired and you're crying because it's an onion and you just keep peeling and it feels like it's never going to end. It feels like, Draupadi Sari, where it just keeps unwinding and unwinding and unwinding and unwinding. And you realize that it was probably, some larger force protecting you from something, but still like after a while, you're just tired. And then there's this pause when you realize that you've peeled back all of the like most obvious, there's more in there, but you peeled back that outer husk and you take a breath and then you start to reveal like the first version of you that isn't completely coated in trauma with trauma sauce. And then that version has to be lived through. And then you end up with a second version. And the thing about the way that we're living so long and the way that we're becoming so self-aware is that I think we're going through more versions of ourselves before we die.
I'm in my teenager right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm loving my no. It's so fucking fun. And like is exactly what you just described. Like I say like my reason to have sex has changed. Right. In the trauma part, I was having sex to affirm myself, to like
Mm-hmm.
it was a validation. It was a temperature check on my relationship. I had lots of reasons to have sex. And then like I did MDMA in 20,
Mm-hmm.
had the most amazing grounding experience with myself that changed my self-worth that day. I had left a completely different person. And with self-worth, okay, now why am I having sex? Because I'm not worried about proving myself or these things.
Right.
And it changed my drive. It just that was my drive was a protection, right? It was a covering for these other things. And now without that, I just get to come at it for a different why. Why are we having sex? Why do I want to have sex? What do I like about sex?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it's still important to me. Like it's still important to me. It just doesn't have to, it's not proving anything.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's such a cool place to be that I've gotten to this layer of the onion.
Yeah. I think for me, sex is more important to me than I have given it priority to reflect. That was a really convoluted sense. I'm not giving sex the priority that would accurately reflect the amount of importance it has to me. But it's always been a little complicated for me because I sometimes have flashbacks and stuff, and like I have to be in a context and with a person that I think can withstand that and not take it personally. And I think sometimes, especially in the harder years, it's just been easier not to think about it too hard. And then, there have been years and years when I haven't had a partner that I was having sex with, and that.
I had a moment the other day. I still haven't figured out why, and I'm not super concerned about why. It was more so a victory in recognizing it at the time. Where I was laying my head in Paul's lap, he was like, we were going through we had a rough situation experience. Hit some of my old triggery trauma stuff, right? And a couple days later, and he goes, can we just go cuddle? Like, I just want to like play with your hair. And I said, okay. So I went and laid in bed and put my head on his lap. And I was letting him do it. And then I felt this like fear come over me.
Interesting.
And I was like, all right, Michelle. So I just said, hey, you know what? Like, that's not actually feeling great to me. Why don't you try just like placing your hand on my head, but not moving? I think that might feel better. And he goes, okay. So he does that. And then I was like, nope, still there. Okay, this isn't working for me. I need to stop. And I didn't explain myself. He didn't ask me. He just said, okay, like, not a problem. And in Paul's kind of way of like, he doesn't necessarily go super deep on stuff, he'll ask the most amazing question out of the blue and like open everything up for me. But in a lot of cases, he just goes, okay, like doesn't even like know why, no nothing. Next day I said, thank you for just like letting me just say not to do that and not like poking at me about wanting to know more. What was happening was that I was feeling incredibly unsafe. It had nothing to do with you. I'm 100% sure of that. But it was so interesting to be able to feel it and do something to advocate for myself, even though it didn't make sense. And I was like, I'm winning. Like, this is the thing, right? Like, this is the gold star moment of like, oh, you're doing this. This is what my inner child would have loved if I could have done this so many years ago.
Sure.
Right. And it's not too late. And like I said, I'm in my inner teenager years now where I'm getting so much, like, I love being angsty and just being like, no, not going to make me. Like, it's just, I imagine my 20s will be interesting. I don't know. Like, I don't know what's next.
Yeah, I think it sometimes does. Like I think we get developmentally stuck in the course of traumatizing events.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't get unstuck until we do all that peeling. And it's not always trauma. Like I spend a lot of time in the transmasculine spaces, and a lot of people who are entering transition later in life, which is becoming younger and younger, which is great, but also really disorienting. Like it used to be later in life was in your 40s, and now later in life, like people come into the spaces sometimes being like, well, I'm 26. Is it too late for me to transition?
Oh my God, I have a story for you. I'll let you finish this one, and then I'm going to tell you the opposite side of that spectrum.
And we're like, no, it's never too late unless you're dead. Dead bodies don't heal from stuff very well, but unless you're dead, it's not too late. And frankly, if you were a ghost, you probably could transition. We just don't understand how that would work. So people come in and they often arrive in these spaces when they're very fresh in their process. We say in trans spaces that people's eggs crack when they kind of realize that they're not cis. And frankly, sometimes people come in years after their egg has cracked, or they've been like, it's cracked, and they've been like kintsugiing it back together. They're like, no, this will be gold and it will be fine. And eventually they give up and come and say, okay, here we are. And watching the unfolding, unfurling, like, and then they might be 38, but they're like, I feel like a teenager. Everything is different. I had no idea my desire worked like this. I had no idea my body would work like this. I had no idea that any of this worked like this. And I'm not even on hormones yet.
Right. Yeah. So the other side of that, and it was the coolest thing. One of the coolest things of last year was I had somebody reach out to me that was in their 80s, and their grandchild had come out as trans.
Mm-hmm.
And they started to question themselves. And I was just like, this is so fucking cool. Like, I didn't get to work with them because they were on the East Coast and I was right at the point where I was moving, but I got to send them over to a trans surrogate, which was just, I think, the best combination for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, it just made my fucking week, right? Maybe my month at that time, because I think we have an idea that people get really less flexible as they get older.
Not always.
No,
I
not
think
always.
40 is the first fuck it age, but I think that's creeping downward too. And then I think there are a couple of other like transition points where people are like, I could die tomorrow. Well, when am I going to do this? In 10 years?
Not now, when?
Yeah. And so, and I think sometimes it's like that ADHD chain up and down the family, where like one person gets diagnosed, usually the kid goes in to get diagnosed because of school stuff. And then the parent's like, what were those questions again? And then the parent is like, and looks at their parent and is like, mom. Mm-hmm. And mom's like, those things are normal. And the parent's like, mom, they're normal for you and for me and for my kid, because we all have ADHD. That's what's going on.
We are looking at a lot of that stuff in our family.
Yeah. And I think it's, and of course the question of how much of this is nurture is also really interesting. But I think watching people come out intergenerationally and watching people figure themselves out intergenerationally, watching people figure out that they're intensive and then be like, and my mom is intensive, but oh my God, she's squished, right? Like that story is so real.
Yeah.
And it's so transformative, because then they look at their kid and they're like, my teenager, my 11-year-old, my 5-year-old, right, is intensive. And I don't have to do that to my kid.
I don't know how you felt about the book Untamed. I know there's lots of people have different feelings about it. I don't know if you ever came in contact with it.
I don't remember. The title is familiar, but I don't
It
think
it was a big COVID hit, like in the very beginning of COVID.
I had no focus at the beginning of COVID, so I wouldn't read.
Well, a lot of women came out as lesbians after reading this book. There was a big influx of, I don't know, I might be gay. But one of the messages from the book that I really love is that liberation is never one direction.
Oh, wait, is this Glennon Doyle's book?
Mm-hmm.
I did read that. I actually liked it. I was surprised.
I
I
did
went
too.
into it
I know a lot of
prepared to
people
not like it.
don't.
Mm-hmm.
I did, and I think
Mm-hmm.
it passed it on to my own family member of like, let me just shake up your whole fucking life.
Right.
She's not divorced.
Good.
She said she shared that she read it, and I said, "Oh, I was thinking about reading it, but I don't know if it'd be worth it." And she goes, "Oh, Michelle, you will love the chapter 3 on blowjobs. That will be your chapter." And it was. I loved that chapter because it's all about Glennon goes to the therapist. She's still married to her husband, but she's thinking about I can't remember what her partner's name is. Anyways, she's thinking about her and she's like, "Look, I just cannot have sex with my
Abby,
husband anymore."
isn't she
Abby,
married to
yes.
Abby?
Yeah. I just cannot have sex with my husband anymore. And the therapist turns to her and says, "Have you considered blowjobs? They're less intimate." And I had this like, oh, holy shit. So this message of we're supposed to perform for our husbands, this sexual need fulfillment dispensary bullshit. That was my ex-husband, right? It's like, I have needs and what are you going to, you can't
That
deny
hits
me
my
of these
demand
needs.
avoidance so hard.
Well, I just rolled over and let him do it, whatever he wanted to do, which killed my sexual desire in lots of ways. So in this chapter, I just bawled because I thought he wasn't necessarily a monster on his own. Because I kept thinking, why would you want this? Why is this fun? This isn't good sex. Like, I'm basically just have like a pulse and a warm body. And why is that enough? Right. But then I read that chapter.
Blowjobs.
I'm just like, oh, this is society. Like the whole society is broken in this sense of like these messages, and religion comes into play here and all sorts of things, right? But I was able to take the focus not just on my ex-husband, but blow it up and go, oh, he was getting this message from all sorts of places.
Right. He was
right. I was
in
getting this message. Yeah. Yeah. So so it was like I ended up finding it to be a really great book. But that the liberation part, like I got out of that marriage and eventually got into therapy. And then one of my kids got into therapy, and then the other kid got into therapy. And holy shit, my ex-husband eventually got into therapy. And he was actually said to one of my kids, "Why are you going to therapy? Why do you want therapy? Therapy's for crazy people." Like, who says that to their actual child?
More people than you'd expect.
The positive part of this is that even he eventually got into therapy, right? So this liberation, this doing the work, it's like a pebble in a pond, right? Yeah. It just keeps going out. And so the work I've done on myself gets to show up in my children, it gets to show up in my ex-husband, it gets to show up in my clients, and then they get to show up with their kids and their partners, and we just keep doing this multiplying because I decided to liberate myself at some point, right? Like it just keeps having this rippling effect, and we're all doing that, and it can make a change.
Yeah. And, basic systems theory is that if you change one member of a system, then nobody gets to stay the same, which is why people get so resentful of one person in a system doing the work. If the whole system didn't sign up for the work, people get so grumpy. And it happens when people read my book, and I'm sure it happened when people read Untamed, and it happens, I'm sure it happens when people show up for cuddling, and like the system change, right? That one figure in the system changes, and when that figure changes, it changes how they operate in the system. It changes their role in the system. It changes their behavior in the system. And so nobody else gets the privilege of just pretending that they're not impacted, because the gaps are no longer being filled the way they were. There's no longer the same space for anybody.
I joke that I have the worst business model, and that I actually try to talk clients out of working with me a lot of times if they're not single, because if they're, especially when their partner doesn't know that they're coming to me, that even if it's in strictly platonic space, they're going to be changed, and it will affect their relationship.
I mean, I think that's true of any good, like, change work, therapeutic.
Oh, for sure. But it's informed consent though, right? Like I have, a couple that worked with, one person in the couple worked with me in full knowledge of the other person. And it was great
Yeah.
for the individual. They're now separated, and I think that's for the best, right? But I don't think anybody, that's not what they signed up for when they
No.
sent him to me, right? Like that wasn't something that they knew was going to happen. And so now I'm just kind of like, just so you know, I need you to have a full understanding of what you're signing up for, because you don't, even if you don't think you're coming here to work on something, right? Even you're coming just for straight cuddling, you're going to learn things. There's no way that you can hang out with me and not change. It's just impossible. So I kind of like want them to really opt in, like
Yeah.
really opt into it, because I'm not holding the responsibility for that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody can really hold the responsibility for the impact that their relationship with someone else has on everyone else that person like. And maybe I've just been queer and polyamorous way too long for that to make any sense to me. But, to me, like, if I came to you or to another cuddlist, because we have a different kind of relationship, but if I came to a cuddlist because I had something that I wanted, or I wanted to work on something, I would, and I wanted to maintain my relationship and the health of my relationship, I would make a practice of including my partner in the journey. Not necessarily in coming to sessions, although maybe I would bring them once to introduce them, be like, this is the person I'm working with. They're not a boogeyman.
Yeah, I would love that.
But also because, like, this is something that I really learned to my bones when I was in seminary, although I knew about it in various other contexts before and after. But if people go to seminary and they don't bring their spouse along for the ride, and when I went to seminary, most seminary programs were fully residential. Now, a lot of them are low residency. So people don't leave their homes in the same way that they used to. But if people didn't bring their spouses along, it was extremely rare for the relationship to survive. Because you've got somebody in a bubble immersed in what we know is a top to toe transformative 4-year-long transformative experience. I used to describe it as that you come in, they take you apart, they hand you the box of Legos, and they say, okay, build a minister. Which I think they give people more support now. I certainly hope they give people more support now. But the dismantling and reassembling experience is still fairly similar. And if your partner is there and watches it happen and participates in it and engages with you throughout the experience, then most of the time the marriages last. The people that I went to seminary with who I met their partners, trying to think if this is true. I think only one of the people who came and was like in a solid, well-established marriage is no longer with that person. But people who didn't bring their partners, it didn't last. And so if I were entering a deep transformative experience, I would come home and I would talk about it. I'd come home and
this is the problem, right? That's the part that's not happening in their relationship to begin with, right? So it's like we're not starting from a place. It'd be very different if a couple showed up and said, "Hey, we're looking for some support. Maybe wheel of consent or whatever," right? That's very different than the person that's like a specific example. I'm having erectile issues. Cool. How do you think working with me by yourself is going to solve that? It doesn't help your relationship at all.
Right.
Like this is stuff you could be working on with your partner. Right.
If the problem is a wiring problem,
it's already starting from a bad place.
Right. If the problem is a wiring problem, we can't fix that here. And if the problem is a psychological problem, you can't fix that without your partner. Like that's relational. Yeah, I'm lucky to be in relationships now that are fairly well rooted in communication. And I think if I were going to see a cuddlist for support, I would just be like, hey, listen, we've tried to fix this problem. It's not getting fixed. I'd really like to go get some support. This is what I'm thinking. This is how I'm thinking it'll work. I'd like your support in doing it. Like, I don't want to be doing this out by myself. I want you to be engaged with it. So I want to go there and then like come back and talk about it and see if we can figure it out. And then my time with the cuddlist would largely be like, okay, so this thing worked, or this thing feels like it was important, or this thing felt like motion. So how can you help me figure out how to bring what we did home?
Yep. exactly it. So I have a client right now that asked me, can I bring my partner to our next session?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yes. Like we were doing a lot of like exercise. We were doing more wheel of consent. I always have cuddling in my work, but so they wanted me to be able to help them be able to do the exercises with each other. And I'm like,
Great.
I was a little nervous because I don't do a lot of couples work because
Yeah,
it's a little too
it's
close to
tricky.
home. It's just so like, I have too many negative things, especially when it comes around like sexuality stuff with
Mm-hmm.
couples. If they showed up really healthy, it's a whole nother situation, but I can sniff out like any kind of negativity is like, no, I can't do this. But this was not the case here. So it was like, I got to show them like 3-minute game and like hand caress, like sensate
Mm-hmm.
focus stuff. And it was just like, oh, it was so healing for me to be part of their process.
Yeah.
Like, cause I've had negative stuff. I don't have many couple stories, but they're generally like, nothing starts out good when you start with fix my wife, right? Like in the early
Yeah.
days, the things I let show up in my office, I would sniff that one out really fast these days. But yeah, this was a great experience of like, yeah, I would love to show you your partner how to do these things so you can practice at home.
Yeah.
So good.
So
Anyways,
beautiful.
okay. We could talk for a very long time.
We've already been talking for 2
I
hours.
know. I know. I thank you, Leela, for obliging me in this I request of like, I love talking about like how I got to where I'm at because I think it's so relevant to the people that I work with because they're generally on the same journey that I am. And you were such a major component of just learning to love myself. And you're one of the top like 5 influential people I think in my earlier development.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And
Yeah,
thank
I'm
you
so
for
glad
being
I met
open
you.
to it. Like, I can write all the books and make all the recordings and tell all the people in the world, but it's only good if people take it in.
Yeah, well, you need an army too of people that are willing to be intensive about it and share it with all the people,
Tell
right?
people, tell people, tell people.
Yeah, and when you start to spot them and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
you're an intensive, let me introduce you to this book. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for being here. How can the people find you?
So my business website is intensivesinstitute.com. If you go there, you'll recognize that it's much more business focused and business oriented. I work a variety of ways with people. I do coaching one-on-one with founders. I do team leadership work in companies. And I also do one-on-one work with people who are, I'll just say the right people. Like right now, I'm working one-on-one with a budding author who wanted some support around moving forward and is an intensive and needed that kind of context around their support. So, so if you think we're fit, let me know. But the focus of my work is usually on helping people have better work relationships, better team relationships, that kind of thing. If you go to the website, there is a link to book. I don't remember what I call it. Intro call, I think, which is not, it's free. And we have 45 minutes to talk about what you need and whether I'm a good fit for you. I also have a podcast. It's called Power Pivot. It's mostly me talking about 20-minute episodes. And then there are also interview episodes that usually run about an hour, sometimes a little longer, because if I get an intensive in the interview seat, sometimes it just takes a while. And of course, the book, You're Not Too Much, it's available through Ingram Spark if you want your indie to order it, or on ebook and paper through Amazon. And like I mentioned earlier, I do have a membership. So you can contact me about that. The easiest way to contact me is, honestly, I'm just going to tell you to text me. Just send me a text message. I won't answer a phone call because I'm
Who does that anymore?
I'm a Zennial. I don't answer phone calls unless I know who it is. But that's really just the easiest way to get in touch with me. I'm in a bit of a website transition that I've been in for a while. So actually, I think intensivesinstitute.membership should get you there too. Yeah. So you can type intensivesinstitute.com/membership and that'll get you to the membership page. Let me see. I've lost my.
Oh, I can still see you.
Okay.
I want to say, lastly, I love how many mutuals we have on social media anymore that I'm like,
yes.
How are y'all connected? Never mind, it doesn't matter. You're clearly an intensive and that's why you're there. Like, so either the word spreads through me or through other people, but somehow we end up with a bunch of overlap that isn't just sex geeks.
Yes.
Right. And that's super cool. And the Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation has got to be about 2 degrees at this point.
I'm sure it's like 1.5. It's like, there are so many times these days when I look at somebody who's friend requesting me on Facebook or who ends up in the comments somehow, and we have like 10 people in common, and I'm like, oh, which circle of friends is it? And it's 3 different circles of friends. Like that's a stage, and that's why I don't leave Facebook, because my overlap is just incredible. So, you can always, if you are connected to me on Facebook, you can always DM me on Facebook. I try to keep my channels of communication fairly open. And I love this work. So thank you for letting me be here and talk about it and talk about everything else. I don't get to
come
talk
back
about the
if you want to
part.
if you just want to shoot the shit in general, you're always welcome back. Like, I just really want to make sure we covered this topic specifically. But if you ever want to talk about, like, I don't know, if you find out something new about your owner's manual and you want a place to talk about it, I would be down to geek out with you about that. But
oh yeah, we should definitely do that. Oh, and intensivesinstitute.com/assessment will get you to the assessment that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. I'll have a robust show notes. That's what I do. I love sharing information. So this just gives me another platform to like connect people to resources, which makes me very happy. And the circle continues.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for being here, and we'll have you back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to comment, pose a question, or learn more about the guests often featured on the show, visit us at intimacylabpodcast.com. Please also take a moment to review us on your favorite podcast app. It's one of the best ways to show your support. As for me, you can find out more about my work at meetmichellerenee.com, as well as on most social medias at meetmichellerenee. Let's connect again soon.